So, Jason also made a good presentation, especially, compared to Professor Gottwald, it's complementary in my mind. Gottwald mentioned the EU and China or East Asia can cooperate in the G20, especially from the different roles. But it's mainly the policy coordination. Jason gave us a very specific issue area, development finance. If we cooperate, EU and East Asia, in global governance, I prefer, do not just in policy coordination. Now, we should go to very specific, the international institutions. Then AIIB is pretty good case. Last month, just June 29, the AIIB got its first AAA credit rating by one of the three, the international credit rating agencies. That's very good news for the AIIB. The same with the World Bank and ADB, AAA. So why can get the AAA? If you read the why, then it mentioned that good governance, of the AIIB, and also their paid-in capital and liquidity. So, that's one of the, I think, a very good case of the EU and East Asia cooperation, because with you, with Germany, with UK, with France at the, the board of directors, then improve the governance of the AIIB. That's pretty good. So now, I think it's more interesting. Q&A floor is open.
Thank you for two very, very interesting presentations. Jason, I had a couple of comments, just rapid fire comments on what you said. I think there's no doubt in many Westerners' minds, if I could be simplistic in that the AIIB does meet many, many, say, international standards. The concerns are more to do with BRI. And I just wonder whether either you or Jörn-Carsten can explain why China managed to present and structure the AIIB in a very sort of attractive manner, which is a very credible manner, but the BRI remains rather vague and visionary, and it's not getting the same kind of, let's say, credibility and traction with the international community. My second point was, you've talked about the G20 development working group, etc., but there are existing fora for cooperation on development issues, on ODA, all the rest of it. The DAC is one. So instead of creating new institutions, I was just wondering why China has been brought into, and it's something that really preoccupies me in my work, why China hasn't been brought into the DAC system, the Busan, the aid effectiveness, the Addis Ababa, etc., all the development conversations that are taking place. China is, and many of the BRICS actually, are still outside this framework, which, and my third point is, if we're going to achieve any of the Agenda 2030 goals, right, apart from infrastructure, we will need extra financing. It'll come from the private sector, it'll come from philanthropy, remittances, the whole gamut of new financial innovative systems, but China's role is going to be quite important. So why, in your thinking, isn't China part of the wider global discussion on Agenda 2030 and how that's going to be fulfilled and achieved? Yeah?
Any other questions?
Yeah, so thank you for your very challenging question, but very important question, I have to say. I personally think, for your first question, why AIB is seems like getting pretty good ahead. In terms of just recently they got, as Jiejin mentioned, they got AAA rating from Standard & Poor's. And the NDB, New Development Bank, they are quite behind. You you just need to look at their website and you find the difference. It's almost at a glance. My understanding is that there are many dimensions. First of all, the AIB is the head is Chinese, and he's Chinese with international mind, international practice, a lot of experience, and he has very comprehensive and very open-minded, and he from what we talk with AIB staff, and we visited them, and we found it's a very international practice. I will work at the World Bank and the AIB for you. I don't feel any difference between AIB and the World Bank or ADB. Look at their website, and if you look at their the documents for the project, they're exactly the same. And the based on my understanding, even the head is Chinese, but the vice president, for example, the German guy, he has financing on many dimensions, and the Chinese government then seems to want to dominate the organization. They just want to be, the top goal is to be successful, not whether it should be Chinese style or should be benefit China directly. China just want to be a successful organization that based in China, and China has heavy influence, but not like control. But in terms of BRIC Development Bank, it's very different. The first of all, the head of the BRIC Development Bank used to be the Development Bank, the India Development Bank, and it's a very it's a very domestic like style. It's not like a traditional organization, and many of the decision making process is a little bit slow, as far as I know. And so in this sense, and China, I have to say China. China has a vice president within the BRIC Development Bank, but he's not like from what I see on the website and over the conference sometimes. What we see is that there's some problem. At least the project is a little bit slower than AIB. So yeah, I mean, so it could be many reasons. I'm not in good position to judge between these two, but I'm based on public knowledge, I think they're quite different in these two dimensions. And also to your second question, why China didn't want to be brought into the traditional OECD DAC standard? I think there could be many reasons. First of all, as academia, I think the OECD DAC standard ODA is a little bit narrowly defined. Yeah. For example, just from look at the health sector, China actually did. For many of you, I think many of you didn't know. I mean, me neither. Only when I come back to China and realize that China actually, and visiting Africa, I feel like China actually doing a lot of assistance to African countries in health sector. In health sector, China built a lot of hospitals and medicines, provide many medicines to African countries. But many of these are, at least from the OECD DAC standard, they are priced in Chinese price, and these are significantly underestimated. because medicine in China is a lot cheaper than Western countries. And also, I think, for example, when we define OECD aid, we should consider only include that the loans that are concessional and from public sector. A lot of loans from China are tied aid, what we call tied aid, not traditional aid. So they are tied with many government loans or aid. So it's very difficult to disentangle, the aid and the loan. So, if you look at Japan in 1960s, 1970s had the same problem, and it received the same criticism from America and the European countries as well. So I think it takes time. It takes some time, and also, and another reason is that China doesn't want to be categorized as OECD member countries. We traditionally think we are the largest developing countries, and we speak for emerging countries. So being categorized or defined as OECD member countries means a lot. Means a lot political and so it takes some time to be brought into the OECD standard. Okay, I don't know if you're satisfied.
I'm not sure whether you ask about the differences between AIIB and the Belt and Road Initiative, and why one is so focused and complying with Western norms and the other not. I might come in on this with one or two ideas. I think the AIIB is a much more focused and clear-cut Chinese central government policy project than the Belt and Road Initiative. If you look into the origins of the Belt and Road Initiative, they are very, very diffuse. And you still do have this strange combination of very much local, regional development strands inside the Belt and Road Initiative and a clear geopolitical ambition. So while this technical project, AIB, I think, can be directed top-down much more clearly than the BRI, as an academic, I still don't really know what BRI actually is. Is it now regional policies gone international, or is it a geopolitical strategy with domestic political impacts? On the positive side, this might be a deliberate signal that while China is following best international practice to establish a multilateral development bank, the Chinese leadership is more than willing to test a new form of international cooperation by just proposing a project, an experiment, an idea, and sees who gets on board to help develop it further. I personally do not fully subscribe to this positive interpretation, but I think this is what's stressed regularly, that it's deliberately kept vague and open for everyone to join. I think this is just, it's now such a big narrative that too many people inside China and too many particular interests can hijack this narrative for their own purposes, and this is why it won't be much more defined, and I don't see it moving closer to global standards and best practices.
Okay, any more comments, questions? Okay.
Thank you. Just a question, short question to you on the, I think you had some provocative slides and assertions. To what extent is the EU a diminishing normative power? And maybe a related question, at one stage you said Brexit, do we need the EU? What do you mean by that?
Thanks for taking up provocative slides. The diminishing normative power is a non-statistically based observation that, of course, since the Eurozone crisis and since the attempt of the UK to find some way of separating itself from the UK, since Eastern European countries more or less defying the consensus, the underlying norms of the European Union and continuing to doing so, contributed to a much more skeptical or negative view of the EU, particularly in China. I think that's something we discussed in a joint paper, that particularly China was very outspoken and saying, well, from 2009, 2010 onwards, we do have emerging powers and we do have decreasing powers. I forgot the exact term. And if you do just a quick politically interested person's view on international press, normative power is based on other people subscribing this kind of power to the European Union. And if this attractiveness is gone, then the normative power is gone. So I would be delighted if Shada's short-term observation that by defining the position of the remaining EU towards the UK, we seem to get out of the worst at the moment, would be a long-term trend. But I fully agree with you. Let's see how long it's going to last. Do we need the EU? Do we need an EU which is not capable of dealing with very profound challenges to its own concept? This is what I think Brexit, the policies of the Orban government, the policies of the, Kaczynski is not a government, but his puppet government. This is a fundamental challenge, and if the EU is not able to live up to its own expectations, its own norms, then as a global actor, it does not deserve to be taken seriously anymore. So, you know, from many discussions that I consider myself quite pro-European and quite strong supporter of the EU, but not an EU which is completely giving up on these norms. And this, of course, has very fundamental effects then on whatever role the EU might do in all sorts of international contexts.
Can I have a quick follow-up, Chair? Just a quick follow-up.
Okay, very quick.
Yeah, no, so the idea of a multi-track or a multi-speed Europe, which I think is the direction you're headed in, right? EU 27 is not going to move forward as a joint unified bloc. It just cannot with all the divisions we know of. Do you think that would recuperate certain essence of the normative or the credibility gap that we have in the form?
Yes, it might. I'm quite happy that finally the debate about Europe has started much more seriously than it did after the Eurozone crisis. I think most people would agree that we now have the discussion we should have had probably after the Single European Act, most definitely in the context of the Eurozone. So yeah, a multiple speed Europe might help. I would have, perhaps for the benefit of a good debate, taken it even further and say, quite clearly, if the European Union is not capable of dealing with these issues, we might be better off by refounding something new. Now, of course, in practical terms, separating from the UK shows what a nightmare of workloads are involved by just dealing with one country trying to get out of it. So I don't think there's a practical option of just dissolving the European Union and starting something better. So I think what we're left with is a Europe of multiple speeds.
My question is going to Professor Jianzhi. Question number one is, you mentioned about the importance of demand when creating new institutions. I fully agree with that. But related with that, who is measuring how the demand for new institutions? Is it dissatisfaction with the existing institutions? Or so how to measure that demand? That is number one question. And number two question is, when we look at the G20 and also the topic of how EU and Asia can cooperate within the context of G20, how to incorporate your paper, your presentation into that context. That is, for me, a little bit difficult. So that's how to develop the idea to incorporate that.
I think, thank you for your very interesting questions. I think for your first question, how to measure demand for infrastructure, I think it's actually, I think it's very hard. And if you look at the reports by different institutions, you will get the different results. For example, if you look at the ADB report, if you look at just ADB, they have different results. They have different estimation from I think 5 years ago. They just recently, I think a couple of months ago, they have the new report. They adjusted estimation. I think for the estimation itself, what they are producing for the demand for infrastructure is from the capital per person. The capital per infrastructure capital per person. Of course, it comes with a lot of controversy in terms of how much capital actually needed to have a country to lift from poverty, right? So that's, I think, the fundamental difference from many reports. McKinsey,
I think some discussion is needed.
Yes.
I misunderstood you when you presented. The demand is not for demand for new institutions, but demand for infrastructure.
Infrastructure overall.
But
yes.
Then my question is still valid because there is a demand for infrastructure.
Yes.
Then this demand can be satisfied by existing institutions, right?
Yes.
If they are intact, they are working,
Yes.
they are functioning well.
Yes. Yes.
So why this
Yes.
need for new institutions? There is my question.
Okay, so I understand. So that's why I have if you remember that I have the slides to compare the difference of the paid-in capital when the existing MDB founded and in 2014. You will find that for like IADB, Inter-American Development Bank, when they founded the paid-in percent of paid-in capital is 50% of total capital, but nowadays it's only 3%. So you can see the difference. The difference is that many of the member states are not financially capable to fund the existing development bank. For example, IADB, just when Trump decided to cut back their funding, right? And if you look at the member states in Latin American countries, they are just financially, if you look at their fiscal balance, they are not able to provide extra funding to bridge this gap. So I think that's why you need to have like China and some other countries that have a lot of foreign reserve or financially more solid to provide the infrastructure.
Matching not only demand is important, but
Yes.
there is supply.
Yes, of course. The structure is very important. Yes,
So
exactly.
matching the demand and supply.
Yes, exactly.
Condition for.
Yes, exactly. That's why I also mentioned that it's better to have the private capital to invest in infrastructure as well, because these days, for example, if you read the if you read many economic paper in the United States, you will find many when during the QE quantitative easing, many companies just keep their money in their bank account. They simply don't invest. And in Japan as well, the expansion of monetary policy has not been working because companies just don't want to invest, right? So I think there be, and especially if you given the big problem or big challenge for private company to invest in infrastructure is the return to infrastructure is very low. It's very low. They found that the average return is less than 5%. For private company, and that's not attractive to them. But given the cheap credit these days, from the quantitative easing or expansion of monetary policy by United States, by Fed, by ECB, you will find that I think to some extent it's actually attractive. So it depends. It just the question actually goes to what kind of mechanism or mechanism design to have the private sector have enough incentive to invest in infrastructure sectors, right? So go back to your second question. I think, unfortunately, I'm not expert on G20. So, but as I mentioned at the very last point, that there are some area that EU and ECB, EU and China and East Asia country can cooperate on international development. Like for example, I think AIB is, the top option for AIB is to issue bond in London, because financially it's a better place. But the problem is that Britain is no longer an EU country, So we will see how, if Frankfurt would be a good alternative for AIB.
That's what I wanted to point out, that after Brexit you might reconsider recommending London.
Oh, very quick.
PPP, yeah. It didn't work all the time well, but maybe sometimes it's worth considering.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to elaborate, but I don't have time to elaborate on. Thank you.
Actually, I think the APPP will be a good solution to this problem. And if you are following World Bank's policy, World Bank has been investing a lot of research and a team on how PPP actually can work out to provide infrastructure investment for developing countries. And but they have not been very successful in terms of delivery. So that, but in China actually we see a lot of PPP collaboration. Of course, it comes with a lot of problem. There are some corruption, but generally I think they are doing pretty well. So it takes some time to the MDBs to learn how they can take advantage of PPP to deliver infrastructure investment. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so I want to conclude this panel. We borrowed 6 minutes from your tea break. Anyway, we started earlier than the schedule. So let's thank you, the panelists and also the participants.